Tonight's lesson. I've chosen a thing which is kind of weird to talk about, but it's my voice. So let's talk about my voice, or maybe let's not and say we did. Okay, so I liked singing from a young age, and I wasn't insecure about it. I sang in the choir for a short time in public school, and later, when I did my bar mitzvah haftorah, I was told I had a beautiful voice. You should be a cantor, my mom's friends would say. No thanks. But at that point, I wasn't screaming like the damned howling in Hades, as my reputation would later have it. I would soon be singing cream songs and blues songs in a sort of tenor soprano, or if you prefer, soprano castrato style. I was a fan of guys with a higher range, like Stevie Marriott and the Small Faces and Humble Pie. Humble Pie's Live at the Fillmore was a hugely influential record to me and most of my peers. I Don't Need No Doctor was a huge song to me, and you can hear its influence in my early singing with Rush. Flipping the page, yeah. I would later often be compared to Robert Plant, and while he certainly pushed me into higher registers, I think a comparison with Marriott would be a bit more accurate, because he had a soulful voice with a strong vibrato, but he rocked. Soon, John Anderson's mellifluous singing would affect me too. He had a high range, but his voice wasn't scratchy or abrasive. It was beautiful, soulful, and emotive, and not unlike a schoolboy chorister. I really wanted to sing like that. Another singer who impressed me was Roger Hodgson on the early Supertramp records. And I liked both Paul Simon and Joni Mitchell a lot. Through the years, there were, of course, many others. I was a huge fan of Bjork later in life. No one would think to make that connection, but there are, and I swear, there are certain words I sing in Rush in a very intentionally Bjork-like manner. I wasn't always aiming for raspiness, I just responded intuitively. Where my voice went was out of necessity relating to what we were writing and the key we were writing it in. And when we were young, we weren't too savvy about keys. If the key we wrote in a song felt right, it would just have to make do. What we came to learn was that in certain lower register, my voice lacked power. But when I booted it up an octave, there was the power. Watching the movie Coda recently, I was struck by the scene in which the choir teacher tries to bring out his students' inner frustrations, coaxing her to sing from the gut. She's the only hearing member of a deaf family. Even if it's an ugly sound, he says, it will feel good. Turn your angst into power. And it dawned on me that my earliest vocal style may also have been rooted in my childhood, listening to the stories of what my parents had endured in the concentration camps, suffering all that bullying and alienation, so that when I began to sing, it all came rushing out like a screaming banshee. I was releasing all those suppressed emotions just by stepping up to the mic and screaming, yeah! Oh, yeah! Of course, then I had to learn how to actually sing. John Griffin once wrote in the Montreal Gazette that I sounded like a guinea pig with an amphetamine habit. In Circus, Dan Nuger said, if Lee's voice were any higher and raspier, his audience would consist exclusively of dogs and extraterrestrials. I kind of like that one. And in 1979, perhaps kindlier, John Rockwell would comment in the New York Times, Mr. Lee sings in a spare but unusual way, a brittle and androgynous tenor. Okay? So yes, my style did come across to some as quite abrasive, especially before we started making records. But you have to put yourself back in 1974. I mean, it's all context, right? Here we are in 2022, when I wrote this book. Our collective ears have become much more open. We've heard every style of music, every kind of singer, bands way heavier than Rush, vocalists even shriekier than I used to be. So imagine you're a critic back then in a reverberant arena. There's this three-piece band you don't know, and this hairy guy is shouting at you. I get that if you consider yourself more sophisticated than the average music fan, our 26 minutes on stage must have seemed like a loud mess. But we were truly into it, playing our parts with honest conviction. And raw or not, we were connecting with a growing number of people. I guess sometimes the official tastemakers are the last to know. Each new Rush album gave me another opportunity to improve as a player and a songwriter, but especially as a singer. It likely became so important to me because all the heat I took for my voice over the years. So sometimes my attitude was like, hey, you don't like the way I sing? Well, I politely invite you to fuck the fuck off and move along to something more suitable to your sensitive tastes. But most often, to meet my own standards, if no one else's, I worked at it, and hard. And then there's singing with a cold. There is really nothing worse than going out on stage in that condition, becoming hoarse, singing badly, unable to hit notes. And I did it far too many times. Now that's a special kind of torture. With our show must go on attitude, we resisted canceling unless it was absolutely unavoidable. So I went on stage with tonsillitis, croup coughs, even a bloody nose, swallowing the blood all the time. And with this nose, that's a large amount of blood. Feeding a spittoon throughout the show. When I was sick, my bass tech Scully would also keep a shit ton of Kleenex and a wastebasket at the side of the stage and run out between songs with hot tea, lemon, and honey. One time my ears became so congested that my trusty ENT doctor in Toronto had to puncture one of my eardrums to drain the fluid out, simply so I could fly to the next gig. When you're flying on tour, you see, during decompression at altitude, fluid in your sinus cavities can become excruciatingly painful and even leave you partially deaf for days. And that's a whole lot of fun. So there I was. You put the needle in, I scream bloody murder. Then, leaving his office, I noticed a young kid in the waiting room. He was pale as a ghost, staring at me in horror. And I said with a wink, "You're up, kid." Thank you. I would like to ask Ryan Cobblemore to come center stage. I'd like to thank you so much for this wonderful, in-depth conversation.